The morning sun blazed across the Nevada desert as Rebecca Martinez adjusted her security uniform for another day of anonymity. 4 years ago, military records declared her killed in action during a classified operation in Yemen. Today, she checked identification cards at Gatehouse Alpha while some of the military's most elite operators walked past her without a second glance. The irony wasn't lost on her that the same men who boasted about their underwater demolition training had no idea they were being watched by someone who had perfected those skills in the deepest, darkest waters, where failure meant death for entire teams. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Fort Sterling Joint Training Facility sprawled across 40,000 acres of unforgiving desert terrain, its concrete structures rising from the sand-like monuments to military precision. The Phoenix complex dominated the skyline, with its gleaming solar panels and reinforced walls designed to withstand everything from sandstorms to coordinated attacks. This wasn't just another training base. This was where the military sent its absolute best to become something approaching legendary. The Advanced Tactical Operations course attracted the cream of the crop from every branch of service: Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, Marine Force Recon, Air Force Pararescue, warriors who had already proven themselves in combat zones across the globe. They came to Fort Sterling to learn skills that existed at the bleeding edge of special operations, techniques so classified that even their families would never know what they had accomplished in the shadowed corners of America's global presence. Becca moved through her morning routine with mechanical precision, arriving at Gatehouse Alpha before dawn to prepare for another day of deliberate invisibility. The small security checkpoint might have seemed insignificant compared to the high-tech training facilities beyond, but it served as the perfect vantage point for someone who needed to observe without being observed. Her uniform was deliberately unremarkable: standard-issue security gear that marked her as support personnel, invisible infrastructure that kept the base running while the real warriors focused on more important matters. The identification scanner beeped rhythmically as she tested the morning's equipment. Her movements were economical and purposeful, habits developed through years of training, where wasted motion could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Anyone watching closely might have noticed the unusual precision with which she handled even mundane equipment, or the way her eyes constantly scanned approaches and exit routes with tactical awareness that went far beyond basic security protocols. Captain Derek Harrison arrived precisely at 0700, his polished boots reflecting the harsh desert sun as he approached the checkpoint with the swagger of someone who had never encountered a challenge he couldn't overcome through superior firepower and unwavering confidence. His Army Ranger tab gleamed on his shoulder, earned through months of brutal training that had broken lesser men. Behind him walked Lieutenant James Rodriguez and Sergeant Mike Thompson, both decorated veterans whose combat experience commanded respect throughout the special operations community. Becca examined Harrison's identification with the same professional courtesy she showed every visitor, her expression neutral as she verified his credentials against the day's authorized personnel list. Harrison barely acknowledged her existence. His attention focused on the conversation he was having with his subordinates about the upcoming training exercises that would test their abilities against scenarios designed to push elite operators beyond their perceived limitations. The morning briefing in the Phoenix complex painted a picture of the challenges awaiting the latest class of special operations candidates. Major David Wilson commanded the room with the bearing of someone who had earned his position through decades of service and a confirmed record of successful missions that remained classified at levels that required congressional oversight. His voice carried the weight of authority as he outlined training objectives designed to identify those few individuals capable of operating in environments where conventional military doctrine provided no guidance. The students who filled the briefing room represented the absolute pinnacle of military achievement. Their uniforms bore the insignia of units whose very existence was often denied by official sources. They spoke in measured tones about operations that would make headlines if they were ever declassified, their voices carrying the quiet confidence of professionals who had walked through the valley of death and emerged with their honor intact. Harrison dominated every conversation with the natural authority of someone whose competence had never been seriously questioned. His tactical knowledge was encyclopedic, his physical conditioning beyond reproach, and his leadership abilities had been tested in combat zones where mistakes resulted in body bags rather than poor performance evaluations. The other students deferred to his expertise, because experience had taught them to recognize genuine competence when they encountered it. But none of them paid attention to the woman who served their coffee during the brief break between morning sessions. Becca moved through the Phoenix complex with the invisible efficiency of someone who had learned to become part of the background, her presence so unremarkable that conversations continued around her as if she possessed no ears to hear or mind to process the information being discussed. Her security clearance allowed her access to most areas of the facility, but her perceived irrelevance meant that classified discussions happened in her presence without consideration of potential security implications. The Advanced Tactical Operations course specialized in scenarios that pushed conventional training beyond its comfortable boundaries. Urban warfare simulation in the mock city called Crossroads. Underwater demolition exercises in specially constructed pools that replicated the conditions found in hostile harbors around the world. Close-quarters combat training that assumed enemy forces possessed equipment and training equivalent to America's finest warriors. Becca's assigned duties kept her busy throughout the day, but her real education happened during the quiet moments when she could observe the training exercises from her position at the security checkpoint. Her eyes tracked movement patterns and tactical decisions with the analytical mind of someone who had once been responsible for planning missions, where failure would result in international incidents and congressional investigations. The students impressed her with their dedication and professionalism, but she also noticed the subtle flaws in technique that would prove fatal in actual combat situations. Harrison's underwater approach sequences followed textbook methodology, but lacked the adaptive thinking required when enemy forces proved more competent than intelligence estimates suggested. Rodriguez demonstrated excellent marksmanship but showed signs of tunnel vision that would leave him vulnerable to flanking maneuvers in complex environments. Thompson possessed the physical conditioning necessary for extended operations, but relied too heavily on equipment solutions, rather than developing the improvisational skills that separated true special operations personnel from highly trained conventional forces. Park showed promise with her tactical awareness and adaptive thinking, but her techniques suggested limited experience with the kind of underwater operations that formed the backbone of maritime special operations. The evening briefings in the Eagle's Nest cafeteria provided opportunities for students to discuss their performance and share insights gained through the day's training exercises. Harrison held court at the center table, his voice carrying across the room as he analyzed tactical scenarios, with the confidence of someone whose opinions had been validated by successful combat experience. His audience listened with a respect, due to a proven warrior whose expertise had been tested under conditions that separated theory from practice. Becca served their meals with the same professional efficiency she brought to every task, her movements economical and purposeful, as she distributed food and refilled beverages without interrupting the flow of conversation. The students barely acknowledged her presence. Their attention focused on discussions that ranged from equipment modifications to tactical innovations that might provide advantages in future operations. But Harrison noticed something that the others missed. Perhaps it was the way she moved through crowded spaces without bumping into chairs or people, or the manner in which her eyes automatically tracked exits and potential threats even while performing routine tasks. His observations were subtle, the kind of professional assessment that special operations personnel performed automatically when encountering anyone whose behavior patterns suggested training beyond the obvious. The moment of confrontation arrived during the third week of training, precipitated by an equipment malfunction that required additional security support for an underwater demolition exercise. Becca was assigned to assist with equipment transport, her security clearance sufficient for the task, but her perceived competence limited to basic manual labor. The advanced students prepared for complex underwater scenarios while she loaded gear with the mechanical efficiency expected from support personnel. Harrison's criticism came without warning, delivered with the casual cruelty of someone who had learned that dominance often required the systematic humiliation of those perceived as inferior. His words cut through the desert air with surgical precision, each syllable designed to establish hierarchy and eliminate any pretense of equality between warriors and support staff. The other students laughed because silence would have been interpreted as disagreement with someone whose combat record commanded their respect. The insult focused on competence, questioning whether someone capable of nothing more than checking identification cards could be trusted with equipment that cost more than most people earned in a year. Harrison's voice carried the authority of rank and the certainty of someone whose superiority had been validated through years of successful operations. His audience responded with the kind of nervous laughter that accompanies moments when cruelty masquerades as humor. Becca's response was measured and professional, her voice carrying no trace of anger or defensiveness despite the public nature of the humiliation. Her words were chosen carefully, acknowledging Harrison's authority, while maintaining her own dignity in ways that suggested either exceptional self-control or the kind of confidence that comes from knowledge that others lack. The moment passed quickly, but its impact lingered in the sudden tension that followed. The underwater demolition exercise that followed revealed the first cracks in Harrison's facade of competence. His technique was textbook perfect, his equipment handling flawless, but his execution lacked the adaptive creativity required when underwater conditions differed from training scenarios. The simulated harbor environment challenged his assumptions about enemy positioning and defensive measures, forcing him to rely on predetermined responses rather than innovative solutions. His performance was adequate by conventional standards, but fell short of the excellence expected from special operations personnel operating in hostile environments. The instructors noted his limitations without comment, their observations recorded in files that would influence future assignment decisions. Harrison blamed the equipment, questioned the scenario parameters, and found fault with environmental conditions that any competent operator should have anticipated and accommodated. Becca watched the exercise from her assigned position near the equipment staging area, her eyes tracking tactical decisions with the analytical mind of someone who had once been responsible for planning similar operations under actual combat conditions. She recognized the flaws in Harrison's approach but maintained her silence, understanding that unsolicited advice from support personnel would be interpreted as insubordination rather than helpful guidance. The days that followed established a pattern of casual disrespect that infected the entire training environment. Harrison's initial insult had established a precedent that other students felt comfortable following, their treatment of support personnel reflecting assumptions about competence and value that went unchallenged by instructors who focused on tactical training rather than leadership development. Becca endured the systematic dismissal with quiet dignity, her professional performance never wavering despite the hostile environment. But change arrived with the desert wind that carried news of Colonel Patricia Chen's unexpected visit to Fort Sterling. Her reputation preceded her like armor, built on successful special operations commands, and a confirmed record of missions that remained classified at levels requiring presidential authorization. She came ostensibly for routine inspection, but her true purpose involved concerns about security vulnerabilities that had been identified through intelligence channels that operated beyond the awareness of facility personnel. Chen's arrival disrupted the comfortable rhythms of training with the sudden presence of someone whose authority transcended local hierarchies. Her bearing commanded immediate respect from students and instructors alike, her questions revealing depths of knowledge that challenged assumptions about standard operating procedures. She moved through the facility with the controlled grace of someone who had learned to hunt human prey in environments where mistakes resulted in international incidents. The recognition between Chen and Becca was subtle, conveyed through glances that lasted milliseconds longer than professional courtesy required. Their interaction appeared routine to casual observers, but trained eyes might have noticed the specific patterns of movement and response that suggested shared experiences and mutual respect, developed through circumstances that remained unspoken and unacknowledged. Chen's investigation revealed security concerns that went beyond routine vulnerabilities, intelligence suggesting that hostile forces had developed detailed knowledge of Fort Sterling's operations and training schedules. The threat assessment painted a picture of coordinated surveillance and potential infiltration that would require immediate response from personnel whose skills went beyond conventional security measures, the kind of specialized expertise that existed only among a select few individuals whose training had been tested under actual combat conditions. The emergency briefing that followed transformed the atmosphere from training exercise to operational reality. Chen's announcement carried the weight of someone whose intelligence sources operated at levels that required congressional oversight, her words painting pictures of threats that would challenge the facility's security in ways that standard protocols were never designed to address. The students listened with the focused attention of professionals who understood that theoretical training was about to become practical application. The crisis that materialized that evening exceeded even Chen's dire predictions. Intelligence reports indicated that a terrorist cell had succeeded in infiltrating the facility's perimeter, their objective involving the acquisition of classified training materials and the elimination of key personnel whose knowledge posed threats to future operations. The attack came with the sudden violence of professionals who had learned to hunt special operations personnel in their own environments. The first casualties were discovered at Gatehouse Alpha, their bodies positioned to send messages about the attackers' capabilities and intentions. The facility's lockdown procedures activated with military efficiency, but everyone understood that conventional security measures would prove inadequate against enemies who possessed equipment and training equivalent to America's finest warriors. The kind of threat that required specialized response from personnel whose skills transcended normal operational parameters. Harrison's volunteers stepped forward with the confidence of professionals whose training had prepared them for exactly this kind of scenario. Their tactical knowledge was encyclopedic, their equipment state-of-the-art, and their determination absolute. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. But the underwater approach to the facility's water treatment plant would require skills that went beyond conventional special operations training, the kind of expertise that existed only among those who had perfected maritime infiltration techniques under actual combat conditions. The moment of revelation arrived when Chin approached Becca with a request that shattered every assumption the students had made about competence and capability. Her words carried the weight of someone whose authority transcended facility hierarchies, her knowledge of Becca's true identity transforming the security guard into someone whose legend had been whispered in the darkest corners of special operations communities around the world. The sealed Trident tattoo on Becca's shoulder told a story that no amount of false documentation could obscure. The insignia marked her as one of the few women who had earned the right to wear the symbol through trials that broke stronger men. Her training tested in combat zones, where failure resulted in international incidents and congressional investigations. But the tattoo also carried deeper significance, modifications that indicated specialized training in areas so classified that their very existence was denied by official sources. The backstory that emerged painted pictures of heroism that existed only in the classified files of missions that would never see daylight. Operation Trident Strike in Yemen had required underwater infiltration of a harbor facility defended by forces whose training rivaled America's finest warriors. Becca's team had succeeded where conventional approaches would have resulted in wholesale slaughter, their mission accomplished through skills that transcended normal human capabilities. The harbor approach had required swimming through waters contaminated with chemical weapons, navigation by instruments that failed under electromagnetic interference, and explosive placement that demanded precision measured in millimeters rather than inches. Enemy forces had detected their presence before the charges could be activated, forcing improvisation that went beyond anything covered in training manuals or operational doctrine. Becca's response to the crisis had established new benchmarks for special operations excellence. Her underwater combat techniques had eliminated 6 enemy divers whose equipment and training exceeded anything previously encountered in combat situations. Her demolition work had succeeded despite environmental conditions that would have defeated lesser operators. Her explosive charges placed with surgical precision that maximized structural damage while minimizing civilian casualties. The extraction had required swimming through wreckage and debris while under continuous fire from enemy forces whose positions commanded every possible escape route. Becca's teammates had been wounded by fragments from underwater explosions, their survival dependent on her ability to navigate submerged obstacles while providing medical care that kept them alive until rescue forces could reach their position. The official records listed her as killed in action when the extraction helicopter was shot down during the rescue attempt. Her body was never recovered from waters too deep and dangerous for conventional recovery operations, her sacrifice honored through decorations that remained classified at levels requiring presidential authorization. But survival had come through the intervention of local fishermen, whose knowledge of underwater currents had guided her to safety in caves that existed below the awareness of enemy surveillance. Months of recovery had followed, her body healing while her spirit wrestled with trauma that no medical intervention could address. The choice to remain officially dead had been made during dark hours, when pain and survivor's guilt competed for dominance of her consciousness. Some legends were too dangerous for public acknowledgement, their truth too valuable for enemy intelligence services to discover and exploit. The demonstration that followed transformed the students' understanding of competence and capability in ways that challenged every assumption they had made about merit and achievement. Becca's preparation was methodical, her movements economical and purposeful, as she donned equipment that seemed familiar in ways that suggested intimate knowledge rather than basic training. Her transformation from invisible support staff to operational personnel was complete and terrifying in its implications. The underwater approach to the facility's water treatment plant required skills that went beyond conventional special operations training. Enemy forces had positioned themselves to exploit every tactical advantage, their defensive measures designed to defeat the kind of frontal assault that conventional thinking would suggest. But Becca's route avoided their killing zones entirely, her navigation through submerged obstacles demonstrating expertise that could only be developed through years of actual combat experience. The terrorist elimination was systematic and efficient, each engagement designed to maximize tactical advantage while minimizing risk to friendly forces. Her underwater combat techniques surpassed anything the students had witnessed in training scenarios, her movements flowing with the lethal grace of someone whose skills had been tested against enemies whose competence rivaled America's finest warriors. The threat that had seemed insurmountable minutes before was neutralized with surgical precision that left no doubt about the operator's capabilities. Harrison's reaction revealed the psychological impact of witnessing excellence that transcended his own considerable abilities. His worldview had been constructed around assumptions about competence and hierarchy that had been systematically destroyed by someone he had dismissed as irrelevant support personnel. The cognitive dissonance of confronting superior skills in unexpected places forced him to question everything he thought he understood about merit and achievement. The apology that followed carried the weight of someone whose arrogance had been humbled by inconvenient truth. His words acknowledged not just his mistaken judgment, but his failure to recognize excellence that had been hidden in plain sight. The other students experienced similar revelations, their reactions ranging from awe to shame, as they confronted the reality that their casual cruelty had been directed at someone whose achievements dwarfed their own. Chen's announcement of Becca's new position as Chief Instructor for Maritime Special Operations carried the authority of someone whose decisions shaped policy at levels that influenced global security. The promotion was not just recognition of exceptional ability, but acknowledgement that some talents were too valuable to waste on the altars of bureaucratic convenience. Her elevation to senior staff represented institutional change that would influence training standards for generations of special operations personnel. The transformation that followed extended far beyond individual skill development to encompass fundamental changes in facility culture and training methodology. Harrison's evolution from antagonist to advocate demonstrated the possibility of growth when arrogance was confronted by undeniable excellence. His journey from casual cruelty to respectful collaboration served as an example for others who needed to learn that true leadership began with recognition of human dignity, regardless of apparent position or authority. The weeks that followed painted pictures of institutional change that reflected Becca's influence on every aspect of facility operations. Her teaching philosophy emphasized precision that extended far beyond tactical techniques to include interpersonal relationships and leadership development. Students learned that excellence in combat required excellence in character, that successful missions depended on teams whose members respected each other's contributions regardless of rank or reputation. The higher graduation rates that resulted from her involvement represented more than statistical improvement. Each successful student would carry her lessons into operational environments, where lives depended on split-second decisions and perfect execution. Her influence would ripple through special operations communities for decades, affecting missions that would never see public acknowledgement, but would shape global security in ways that prevented conflicts rather than merely winning them. The young recruit who approached Becca during evening training represented every person who had ever doubted their place in institutions designed to test human limits. Her nervous uncertainty spoke to fears that transcended gender and entered the realm of universal human experience. The anxiety that accompanies moments when individuals must prove themselves capable of achievements that seem impossible from their current perspective. Becca's response carried the wisdom of someone whose own journey had taught her that strength lay not in individual achievement, but in the ability to lift others toward excellence they never knew they possessed. Her words acknowledged the recruit's fears while providing guidance that would help her navigate challenges that would test every aspect of her character and capability. The conversation represented the passing of knowledge from one generation to the next, ensuring that hard-won wisdom would not die with those who had earned it through sacrifice and determination. The evening briefing that concluded another day of training carried different energy than those that had preceded Becca's revelation. Students approached their instruction with humility that had been absent before, their questions reflecting genuine desire to learn, rather than competitive attempts to demonstrate superior knowledge. The facility's culture had shifted from one that rewarded arrogance to one that valued competence regardless of its source. Harrison's leadership during the final training exercise demonstrated growth that went beyond tactical improvement to encompass fundamental changes in character and perspective. His commands showed consideration for team members whose contributions might have been overlooked in the past. His planning incorporated insights from sources he would previously have dismissed as irrelevant. The mission's success reflected not just individual skill but collective excellence that emerged when talented people worked together toward common objectives. The graduation ceremony that marked the completion of another training cycle carried significance that extended beyond individual achievement to represent institutional transformation. Students who had arrived with assumptions about hierarchy and merit departed with understanding that excellence could emerge from unexpected sources, that true leadership required constant learning rather than rigid adherence to predetermined notions about competence and capability. Becca's address to the graduating class emphasized service over glory, teamwork over individual achievement, and the responsibility that accompanied the privileges of advanced training and specialized knowledge. Her words carried the authority of someone whose sacrifices had earned the right to speak about duty and honor in ways that inspired rather than merely instructed. The students listened with the respect due to a warrior whose legend was still being written. The desert sunset that marked the end of another day at Fort Sterling painted the sky in colors that reflected the transformation that had taken place within the facility's walls. The Phoenix complex stood as a monument to the possibility of institutional change, when leadership embraced truth over comfortable fiction, when competence was valued regardless of its source, and when respect was earned through action rather than assumed through position. The mountains beyond the facility kept their secrets well, but some truths were too powerful to remain buried forever. Legends walked among the living once more, their skills dedicated to purposes that served the greater good rather than personal glory. The rifle might have been replaced by other tools, but the precision remained constant, the dedication unwavering, and the commitment to excellence absolute. In the quiet moments before dawn, when the desert held its breath and the stars provided the only illumination, Becca prepared for another day of teaching and learning. Her journey from presumed death to renewed purpose represented more than personal redemption. It embodied the possibility that every person possessed hidden potential waiting for the right moment to emerge, that strength could be found in unexpected places, and that true legends were made not through individual achievement, but through the lives they touched and the standards they set for generations yet to come. The story continued each day with new students, new challenges, and new opportunities to prove that excellence knew no boundaries, save those imposed by limited imagination and stubborn prejudice. The ghost had become guardian, the legend had become teacher, and the future belonged to those wise enough to recognize that greatness often wore the humblest disguise. The Advanced Tactical Operations course at Fort Sterling represented the pinnacle of military training excellence, a crucible where America's finest warriors came to transcend the limitations of conventional warfare and enter the realm of legendary capability. The facility's reputation drew candidates from every corner of the special operations community, men and women whose service records read like classified novels filled with operations that would never see public acknowledgement, but had shaped global security in ways that prevented wars rather than merely winning them. Major David Wilson commanded this elite institution with the quiet authority of someone whose leadership had been forged in the fires of actual combat, rather than polished in the sterile environments of staff colleges. His office walls displayed photographs that told stories of successful missions spanning 3 decades of service, each image representing lives saved and objectives accomplished through the application of superior training and unwavering dedication to mission success. The decorations that adorned his uniform spoke to valor that had been tested under conditions where failure would have resulted in international incidents and congressional investigations. The Phoenix complex served as the administrative heart of Fort Sterling, its solar-powered systems and reinforced construction representing the military's commitment to sustainable operations in one of America's harshest environments. The building's design incorporated lessons learned from facilities that had been attacked by sophisticated enemies, its blast-resistant walls and advanced security systems providing protection against threats that ranged from conventional explosives to electromagnetic warfare designed to disable critical infrastructure. Wilson's morning briefings brought together instructors whose combined experience represented the accumulated wisdom of America's special operations community. These were not theoretical academics, but proven warriors whose teaching was informed by actual combat experience in environments where textbook solutions proved inadequate, and survival depended on adaptive thinking under extreme stress. Their voices carried the weight of authority earned through successful completion of missions that existed at the classified margins of international law. Colonel Sarah Bennett commanded the facility's Urban Warfare Training Division. Her expertise developed through operations in cities where enemy forces possessed equipment and training that rivaled America's finest units. Her simulation scenarios pushed students beyond their comfort zones into environments where conventional tactics proved inadequate, and success required innovative approaches to problems that had no predetermined solutions. The mock city called Crossroads represented her vision of training that prepared warriors for the complexities of modern conflict. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Reed supervised underwater demolition training with the meticulous attention to detail that had characterized his operational career in maritime special operations. His programs emphasized precision under extreme conditions, teaching students to operate in environments where visibility was measured in inches, where equipment failure meant death, and where mission success required skills that transcended normal human limitations. His reputation for excellence had attracted students from allied nations, whose own special operations communities sought to benefit from American expertise. Commander Patricia Hayes oversaw close-quarters combat instruction with a systematic approach that had made her one of the few women to achieve command positions in special operations. Her tactical innovations had been adopted throughout the special operations community, her training methods proving effective in combat situations where split-second decisions determined mission success or catastrophic failure. Students who completed her programs carried skills that had been tested in actual combat and refined through years of continuous improvement. The student body that gathered for the current training cycle represented exceptional achievement, even by special operations standards. Captain Derek Harrison arrived with recommendations that read like citations for valor. His Army Ranger background, complemented by combat experience in 3 different theaters of operation. His tactical knowledge was encyclopedic, his physical conditioning beyond reproach, and his leadership abilities had been tested in situations where mistakes resulted in casualties rather than poor performance evaluations. Lieutenant James Rodriguez brought credentials from Marine Force Recon that included specialized training in mountain warfare and Arctic operations. His record of successful missions in environments that challenged human endurance had earned recognition from commanders who reserved praise for those whose achievements exceeded exceptional and entered the realm of legendary.
His presence at Fort Sterling represented the Marines' commitment to maintaining technological and tactical advantages over potential adversaries. Staff Sergeant Lisa Park arrived from Air Force Pararescue with qualifications that included advanced medical training and helicopter insertion techniques. Her experience in personnel recovery operations had tested her skills in situations where enemy forces controlled the battle space, and extraction required navigation through defended territory under conditions that would have defeated lesser operators. Her combination of tactical expertise and medical knowledge made her invaluable for operations requiring specialized capabilities. Sergeant Mike Thompson represented the Navy's investment in special operations excellence. His SEAL training complemented by experience in counterterrorism operations that remained classified at levels requiring congressional oversight. His underwater combat skills had been developed through missions that pushed the boundaries of human capability. His reputation for reliability under extreme stress earning respect from commanders who demanded perfection from personnel whose failures could result in international incidents. The training schedule that Wilson outlined during morning briefings reflected the facility's commitment to excellence that transcended conventional military education. Students would face scenarios designed to test every aspect of their capabilities, from individual marksmanship to complex team operations requiring coordination between multiple units operating in hostile environments. The curriculum integrated lessons learned from recent operations with theoretical innovations that prepared students for threats that had not yet materialized, but were anticipated based on intelligence assessments of enemy capabilities. Urban warfare training in Crossroads presented challenges that reflected the complexities of modern conflict in environments where civilian populations complicated targeting decisions and enemy forces employed tactics that blurred distinctions between combatants and non-combatants. The mock city's design incorporated architectural features from conflict zones around the world, its buildings and street layouts presenting tactical problems that required innovative solutions rather than reliance on predetermined responses. Bennett's instruction emphasized adaptive thinking under stress, teaching students to evaluate rapidly changing situations and develop appropriate responses when conventional doctrine provided inadequate guidance. Her scenarios incorporated civilians played by facility personnel, forcing students to make split-second decisions about rules of engagement while under fire from enemy forces whose positions and capabilities remained unknown until revealed through tactical contact. The underwater training facilities at Fort Sterling represented the most advanced maritime special operations instruction available anywhere in the world. Reed's programs utilized pools that could simulate oceanic conditions, their wave generators, and current systems, creating environments that challenged even experienced operators. Students learned to operate in visibility conditions that approached zero, where navigation depended on instruments that could fail, and where mission success required skills that transcended normal human limitations. The underwater demolition scenarios that Reed designed pushed students beyond their previous experience into realms where precision was measured in millimeters and timing was calculated in seconds. Students learned to place charges while wearing equipment that restricted movement and limited visibility, their work complicated by enemy forces, whose underwater defensive measures included detection systems and response capabilities that reflected the sophistication of modern military technology. Hayes's close-quarters combat instruction took place in facilities designed to replicate the confines of buildings, vehicles, and aircraft, where special operations personnel might find themselves engaged in life-or-death struggles with enemies whose training equaled their own. Her scenarios required students to operate in spaces that restricted movement, while making decisions that determined mission success within timeframes that challenged human reaction capabilities. The psychological pressure that Hayes incorporated into her training reflected the reality that combat effectiveness depended not just on physical skills, but on mental resilience under conditions that would overwhelm personnel whose preparation had been limited to conventional training scenarios. Students learned to function when exhausted, when wounded, when equipment failed, and when mission parameters changed without warning in ways that required immediate adaptation. Harrison's performance during the initial evaluation exercises established him as the unofficial leader among his peer group, his tactical decisions earning respect from instructors whose praise was reserved for those whose achievements exceeded merely exceptional and entered the realm of superior. His approach to problem-solving demonstrated the analytical thinking that separated competent operators from those whose capabilities approached legendary status within special operations communities. Rodriguez impressed instructors with his physical conditioning and technical proficiency, his execution of complex maneuvers reflecting training that had been tested under actual combat conditions. His willingness to attempt challenges that other students approached with caution demonstrated the aggressive mindset that special operations missions required when conventional approaches would result in mission failure and potential casualties. Park's tactical awareness and medical skills provided capabilities that enhanced team effectiveness during scenarios requiring personnel recovery or casualty evacuation under fire. Her ability to maintain medical protocols while engaged in combat operations reflected specialized training that few operators possessed, her presence transforming team capabilities in ways that influenced tactical planning and mission execution. Thompson's underwater expertise established him as the acknowledged leader for maritime operations. His technical knowledge complemented by experience in actual combat situations, where equipment failure would have resulted in mission failure and potential loss of life. His familiarity with specialized equipment and tactics gave his team advantages during underwater scenarios that challenged other students whose training had been limited to basic capabilities. The competitive environment that developed among the students reflected the high-performance culture that characterized special operations communities, where individual excellence was valued but subordinated to team success in situations where mission accomplishment required coordinated effort rather than individual heroics. Students pushed each other toward higher levels of achievement while maintaining the professional relationships necessary for effective teamwork under combat conditions. Bennett's urban warfare scenarios created environments where students faced moral and tactical dilemmas that reflected the complexities of modern conflict in populated areas. Her instruction emphasized the importance of maintaining civilian safety while accomplishing military objectives, teaching students to evaluate rapidly changing situations where enemy forces deliberately position themselves among non-combatants to complicate targeting decisions and response options. The stress that Bennett incorporated into her scenarios pushed students beyond their comfort zones into psychological territory, where decision-making capabilities were tested under conditions that approximated actual combat stress. Students learned to function effectively when information was incomplete, when enemy capabilities exceeded intelligence estimates, and when mission success required actions that carried significant risks to both operators and civilians. Reed's underwater training pushed students to their physical and psychological limits, teaching them to operate in environments where equipment failure could prove fatal, and where navigation errors could result in mission failure with strategic implications. His scenarios incorporated emergency procedures that students might never encounter in actual operations, but whose mastery provided confidence and capabilities that enhanced performance under all conditions. The technical complexity of Reed's underwater demolition training required students to master skills that few operators outside maritime special operations communities ever attempted. His instruction covered explosive placement techniques that demanded precision beyond normal human capabilities, timing calculations that required mathematical accuracy under stress, and escape procedures that pushed physical endurance to its limits while maintaining tactical effectiveness. Hayes's close-quarters combat training tested students in environments where split-second decisions determined survival outcomes, and where tactical mistakes resulted in immediate consequences that could not be reversed through superior equipment or supporting fire. Her scenarios emphasized the importance of situational awareness in confined spaces, where enemy positions could change rapidly and where friendly fire presented constant dangers. The psychological pressure that Hayes incorporated into her training reflected her understanding that combat effectiveness under extreme stress required mental conditioning that went beyond physical preparation. Students learned to maintain tactical awareness when exhausted, to make critical decisions when wounded, and to continue fighting when conventional wisdom suggested that survival required withdrawal from contact. Harrison's leadership during team exercises demonstrated tactical thinking that impressed instructors whose standards had been established through successful completion of missions that remained classified at the highest levels. His ability to coordinate complex operations while maintaining situational awareness and adapting to changing conditions reflected training and experience that separated competent leaders from those whose capabilities approached legendary status. Rodriguez's performance during mountain warfare scenarios showcased physical conditioning that exceeded even the demanding standards of Marine Force Recon, his endurance and technical climbing skills enabling team success in environments where weather conditions and terrain features challenged human capabilities. His willingness to accept additional responsibilities during complex operations demonstrated leadership potential that instructors noted for future assignment considerations. Park's medical expertise proved invaluable during scenarios involving casualty evacuation under fire. Her ability to provide advanced medical care while maintaining tactical effectiveness, reflecting specialized training that enhanced team capabilities in ways that influenced mission planning and execution. Her presence transformed tactical options available to team leaders during operations requiring personnel recovery or medical evacuation. Thompson's underwater leadership established him as the acknowledged expert for maritime operations, his technical knowledge and combat experience providing capabilities that other team members relied upon during complex scenarios requiring underwater infiltration or demolition. His familiarity with specialized equipment and tactics made him indispensable during training exercises that pushed students beyond conventional limits. The facility's evening briefings provided opportunities for students to analyze their performance and incorporate lessons learned into future training exercises. Wilson's leadership during these sessions emphasized continuous improvement rather than competitive comparison, encouraging students to focus on team effectiveness rather than individual achievement, in recognition that special operations missions required coordinated effort rather than individual heroics. Bennett's tactical analysis during evening sessions helped students understand the strategic implications of their tactical decisions, teaching them to evaluate their actions within broader operational contexts that considered political and diplomatic consequences alongside military effectiveness. Her instruction emphasized the importance of understanding mission objectives beyond immediate tactical success. Reed's technical briefings provided students with theoretical knowledge that supported their practical training, his explanations of underwater physics and demolition principles enhancing their understanding of techniques they had practiced during training exercises. His instruction connected practical skills with scientific principles that enabled students to adapt their techniques to novel situations they might encounter during actual operations. Hayes's psychological debriefings helped students process the stress and decision-making challenges they had faced during close-quarters combat scenarios, her guidance enabling them to develop mental resilience that would serve them during actual combat situations where psychological pressure could compromise tactical effectiveness. Her instruction emphasized the importance of mental preparation alongside physical conditioning. The support staff that maintained Fort Sterling's operations worked with professional efficiency that enabled instructors to focus on training rather than administrative concerns. Their expertise in logistics, maintenance, and security provided the foundation upon which advanced training programs operated, their contributions essential but often unrecognized by students whose attention focused on tactical instruction rather than infrastructure support. Rebecca Martinez moved through this environment with the invisible efficiency that characterized competent support personnel, her security duties providing opportunities to observe training exercises while maintaining the low profile that her unofficial status required. Her presence at checkpoints and during equipment transport gave her access to facilities and information that few support staff members ever encountered, but her apparent irrelevance meant that her observations went unnoticed by students and instructors whose attention focused on more obvious concerns. The morning equipment checks that Becca performed revealed her familiarity with weapons and technical systems that exceeded what might be expected from someone whose official duties involved identification, verification, and basic security protocols. Her movements around complex equipment suggested training and experience that went beyond routine familiarity, but her efficiency in completing assigned tasks meant that her supervisors had no reason to question her capabilities or background. Harrison's casual dismissal of support personnel reflected attitudes that were common among elite operators, whose focus on tactical excellence sometimes obscured their appreciation for the complex logistics that enabled their training and operations. His confidence in his own capabilities was justified by his record of successful missions, but his assumptions about the competence of others were based on limited information and institutional prejudices that went unexamined. The incident that would change everything was building like a desert storm on the horizon, its approach visible to those who knew how to read the signs, but invisible to those whose attention focused on immediate concerns rather than strategic implications. Intelligence reports that reached Wilson's desk painted pictures of threats that exceeded routine security concerns and entered territory that would require responses beyond conventional defensive measures. The facility's isolation in the Nevada desert provided security advantages that included early warning of approaching threats and terrain features that channeled enemy approaches into predetermined killing zones. But that same isolation also meant that external support would be delayed during emergency situations, requiring facility personnel to rely on their own capabilities until reinforcements could arrive from distant bases whose response times were measured in hours rather than minutes. Chen's impending arrival carried significance that went beyond routine inspection visits. Her intelligence background and special operations experience indicating that Fort Sterling faced challenges that required expertise beyond conventional military responses. Her reputation for solving complex problems through innovative approaches had earned respect from military leaders whose own careers had been built on successful completion of missions that pushed the boundaries of conventional military capability. The desert evening that concluded another day of intensive training carried the promise of challenges that would test everything the students had learned during their time at Fort Sterling. The setting sun painted the landscape in colors that reflected the harsh beauty of an environment that had shaped the facility's training philosophy, where conditions demanded excellence because mediocrity resulted in failure that could not be tolerated or excused. The stars that emerged as darkness claimed the desert provided the only illumination for activities that required concealment from observation, their ancient light witnessing preparations for confrontations that would determine whether Fort Sterling's reputation for excellence was justified by the capabilities of its personnel. The night held secrets that would be revealed when circumstances demanded actions rather than theories, when training would be tested against realities that exceeded classroom scenarios. The facility's security systems maintained their electronic vigilance through the hours of darkness, their sensors and cameras providing coverage that should have detected any unauthorized approach to the perimeter. But sophisticated enemies understood electronic surveillance limitations and possessed capabilities that could exploit vulnerabilities in ways that conventional security planning had not anticipated. The calm that settled over Fort Sterling during the midnight hours masked preparations for challenges that would test every aspect of the facility's defensive capabilities and the competence of personnel whose training had prepared them for threats that existed at the margins of conventional military doctrine. The desert silence carried promises of violence that would separate theory from practice, training from reality, assumption from truth. Morning would bring revelations that would transform every assumption about competence and capability that students and instructors had developed during their time together. The comfortable hierarchies that had defined relationships between personnel would be challenged by realities that transcended rank and reputation, where survival would depend on skills rather than credentials, and where true leadership would emerge from unexpected sources. The Phoenix Complex stood ready for whatever challenges dawn might bring, its systems and personnel prepared for scenarios that had been planned and trained for through months of careful preparation. But the most dangerous threats were often those that exceeded planning assumptions and required responses that went beyond predetermined procedures, where success would depend on individual initiative and collective competence rather than institutional protocols. The pre-dawn hours at Fort Sterling held a peculiar quality that veteran personnel had learned to appreciate during their extended stays in the Nevada desert. The temperature differential between blazing daytime heat and surprising nighttime cold created atmospheric conditions that affected everything from equipment performance to human endurance, teaching lessons about adaptation that no classroom instruction could replicate. The facility's operations began before sunrise, not merely for scheduling efficiency, but because desert conditions demanded that intensive physical training occurred during the brief window, when temperatures remained within tolerable ranges. Rebecca Martinez arrived at Gatehouse Alpha, while stars still dominated the sky, her punctuality reflecting habits developed through years of operational discipline, where timing meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Her morning routine included equipment checks that went far beyond basic security protocols, her attention to detail revealing familiarity with systems whose proper functioning required knowledge that exceeded standard training manuals. The identification scanners, communication equipment, and surveillance monitors all received thorough inspection despite their apparent reliability during previous shifts. The coffee that percolated in the security office carried the bitter strength that military personnel preferred, its caffeine content calculated to maintain alertness during extended duty periods that tested human endurance. Becca's preparation of the morning beverage reflected the same methodical approach she brought to every task, measuring portions with precision that suggested experience in environments where waste could not be tolerated and where every resource required careful conservation to ensure availability when most needed. The facility's wake-up call echoed across the compound at 0530, its tone designed to penetrate the deepest sleep and bring personnel to immediate alertness. The sound carried across buildings that housed some of America's finest warriors, men and women, whose reflexes had been honed through combat experience that most civilians could never comprehend. Their response to the morning summons reflected conditioning that transformed the transition from sleep to operational readiness into movements that appeared effortless but represented years of training and discipline. Harrison emerged from Spartan barracks with the bearing of someone whose confidence had been validated through successful completion of missions that remained classified at levels requiring congressional oversight. His morning routine included physical conditioning that maintained the exceptional fitness standards required for special operations personnel. His exercises performed with intensity that reflected understanding that mission success often depended on physical capabilities that exceeded normal human limitations.
The advanced students who gathered for morning formation represented diverse backgrounds within the special operations community, but their shared experience of combat under extreme conditions created bonds that transcended service rivalries and competitive instincts. Rodriguez adjusted his equipment with movements that reflected Marine Corps training in environments where equipment failure meant mission failure and potential casualties. Thompson's preparation demonstrated Navy discipline developed through underwater operations, where precision was measured in seconds and where mistakes carried consequences that could not be reversed. Park's morning inspection of medical supplies reflected Air Force standards for personnel recovery operations, her inventory revealing familiarity with equipment whose proper use required training that few operators outside specialized communities ever received. Her attention to pharmaceutical supplies and emergency medical devices demonstrated expertise that enhanced team capabilities during scenarios requiring casualty evacuation or medical intervention under fire. The breakfast preparation in the Eagle's Nest cafeteria followed military efficiency standards that ensured nutritional requirements were met, while maintaining the logistical simplicity necessary for operations in remote locations. The kitchen staff worked with practiced coordination that reflected understanding of dietary needs for personnel whose physical demands exceeded civilian comprehension, their meal planning, incorporating protein and carbohydrate ratios that supported intensive training schedules and extreme physical exertion. Becca's security duties during breakfast service provided opportunities to observe interactions between students whose competitive instincts were balanced by professional respect for achievements that had earned them positions at Fort Sterling. Their conversations revealed tactical knowledge that had been developed through actual combat experience, their discussions of equipment modifications and operational techniques reflecting innovations that had emerged from necessity during missions where standard procedures proved inadequate. The technical complexity of their discussions impressed even experienced military personnel, their familiarity with weapons systems and tactical equipment demonstrating expertise that separated special operations personnel from conventional forces. Harrison's analysis of urban warfare scenarios reflected experience in cities where enemy forces possessed training and equipment that rivaled American capabilities, his tactical insights revealing understanding of complexities that challenged even experienced operators. Rodriguez's contributions to discussions about mountain warfare demonstrated knowledge that had been earned through operations in terrain that tested human endurance and technical climbing skills. His understanding of weather effects on equipment performance and human capabilities reflected experience in environments where conditions could change rapidly and where preparation for extreme situations meant the difference between mission success and potential disaster. Thompson's expertise in underwater operations provided perspectives that few other students could match, his technical knowledge of diving equipment and underwater navigation systems reflecting specialized training that enabled mission success in maritime environments where visibility approached zero and where equipment failure could prove fatal. His discussions of underwater demolition techniques revealed familiarity with explosive placement methods that required mathematical precision under extreme stress. Park's medical knowledge complemented her tactical training in ways that enhanced team effectiveness during complex scenarios requiring personnel recovery or casualty evacuation. Her understanding of trauma medicine under combat conditions reflected specialized instruction that enabled her to provide advanced medical care while maintaining tactical awareness and defensive capabilities. The morning briefing in the Phoenix complex brought together students whose individual achievements represented the pinnacle of military excellence, but whose continued development required instruction that pushed them beyond their current capabilities into territory where conventional training methods proved inadequate. Wilson's presentation outlined training objectives that would test every aspect of their physical and mental conditioning, while introducing tactical challenges that reflected emerging threats to American security interests. Bennett's urban warfare instruction emphasized scenarios that incorporated civilian populations and infrastructure considerations, that complicated targeting decisions, and required tactical solutions that balanced military effectiveness with political and diplomatic implications. Her training environments replicated conditions found in conflict zones where enemy forces deliberately operated among non-combatants to exploit American reluctance to accept civilian casualties during military operations. The mock city of Crossroads represented architectural features from urban environments around the world, its buildings and street layouts presenting tactical problems that required innovative solutions rather than reliance on predetermined responses. The facility's design incorporated lessons learned from actual combat operations in cities where conventional military doctrine proved inadequate and where success required adaptive thinking under extreme stress. Reed's underwater training facilities utilized technology that created oceanic conditions within controlled environments, enabling students to develop maritime special operations skills without the logistical complications and safety risks associated with open water training. The wave generators and current systems could simulate weather conditions that challenged even experienced underwater operators, their programmable parameters enabling instruction that prepared students for scenarios they might never encounter, but whose mastery provided confidence and capabilities that enhanced performance under all conditions. Hayes's close-quarters combat instruction took place in facilities designed to replicate confined spaces, where special operations personnel might find themselves engaged in life-or-death struggles with enemies whose training and equipment matched American capabilities. Her scenarios required split-second decision-making in environments where tactical mistakes resulted in immediate consequences that could not be reversed through superior firepower or supporting elements. The equipment storage areas that supported Fort Sterling's training programs contained weapons and technical systems whose combined value exceeded the gross domestic product of many nations, their sophisticated capabilities reflecting American investment in military technologies that maintained tactical advantages over potential adversaries. The inventory management required to maintain these systems operational demanded expertise that went beyond routine military logistics, requiring personnel whose technical knowledge enabled them to diagnose and repair equipment whose failure would compromise training effectiveness. Becca's assigned duties during equipment transport provided access to weapons and systems that few support personnel ever encountered, her security clearance sufficient for these tasks, but her perceived competence limited to basic manual labor and transportation logistics. Her movements around complex military equipment demonstrated familiarity that suggested training beyond routine security protocols, but her efficiency in completing assigned tasks meant that supervisors had no reason to question her capabilities or investigate her background. The precision with which she handled delicate instruments and weapons systems revealed knowledge that exceeded standard orientation briefings. Her movements around explosive materials and electronic components suggesting experience that went beyond theoretical familiarity. The care she exercised when transporting specialized equipment reflected understanding of operational requirements and safety protocols that few support staff members possessed, but her professional demeanor prevented these observations from attracting attention from personnel whose focus remained fixed on training objectives. Harrison's interaction with support personnel reflected attitudes that were common among elite operators whose confidence in their own capabilities sometimes obscured their appreciation for the complex logistics that enabled their training and operations. His dismissive comments about security staff revealed assumptions about competence that were based on institutional hierarchies rather than actual observation of individual capabilities, his prejudices reinforced by cultural norms that equated rank with ability and overlooked excellence that existed outside traditional recognition systems. The casual arrogance that characterized Harrison's treatment of support personnel was shared by other students whose achievements had earned them positions at Fort Sterling, but whose success had also isolated them within communities where exceptional performance was considered normal rather than remarkable. Their confidence was justified by their records of successful missions, but their assumptions about others were based on limited information and institutional prejudices that went unexamined and unchallenged. Rodriguez demonstrated similar attitudes during his interactions with facility staff, his focus on technical excellence blinding him to capabilities that existed outside his immediate peer group. His respect was reserved for those whose achievements matched his own, his dismissal of others reflecting cultural conditioning that valued certain types of competence while overlooking skills that did not conform to established recognition patterns. Thompson's underwater expertise had earned him respect from instructors and fellow students, but his specialized knowledge had also created assumptions about the relative value of different skill sets that influenced his perception of personnel whose contributions operated outside maritime special operations. His technical competence was unquestioned, but his understanding of organizational dynamics was limited by experience that had not exposed him to the full spectrum of capabilities that existed within military communities. Park's medical training provided perspectives that enhanced her tactical effectiveness, but her focus on personnel recovery operations had created assumptions about support roles that influenced her interactions with facility staff, whose duties appeared routine rather than specialized. Her willingness to assist others reflected professional courtesy, rather than recognition of potential expertise that existed beyond her immediate understanding. The competitive environment that developed among students reflected the high-performance culture that characterized special operations communities, where individual excellence was encouraged but subordinated to team effectiveness during missions that required coordinated effort rather than individual heroics. The tension between personal achievement and collective success created dynamics that influenced training effectiveness and shaped relationships between personnel whose future operations would depend on mutual trust and shared competence. Bennett's instruction during urban warfare scenarios emphasized the importance of understanding civilian behavior patterns and cultural considerations that affected tactical planning in populated areas. Her scenarios incorporated actors who portrayed non-combatants whose responses to military presence reflected research into population dynamics during conflict situations, teaching students to evaluate rapidly changing conditions where enemy forces exploited civilian populations to complicate American tactical responses. The psychological pressure that Bennett incorporated into her training reflected understanding that combat effectiveness under extreme stress required mental conditioning that complemented physical preparation. Students learned to maintain tactical awareness when exhausted, to make critical decisions when information was incomplete, and to adapt to changing mission parameters when enemy capabilities exceeded intelligence estimates. Reed's underwater demolition training pushed students beyond their previous experience into environments where equipment failure could prove fatal, and where mission success required technical precision that exceeded normal human capabilities. His scenarios incorporated emergency procedures that tested student responses to catastrophic equipment malfunctions, teaching them to improvise solutions when predetermined procedures proved inadequate. The mathematical complexity of underwater demolition calculations required students to perform precise computations while wearing equipment that restricted movement and limited visibility, their work complicated by current conditions and timing requirements that demanded accuracy measured in seconds rather than minutes. Reed's instruction connected theoretical knowledge with practical applications that prepared students for situations where academic understanding was insufficient, and where survival depended on intuitive grasp of physical principles under extreme stress. Hayes's close-quarters combat training incorporated weapons malfunctions and ammunition shortages that forced students to continue fighting when their primary equipment failed, teaching them to improvise weapons and adapt tactics when circumstances exceeded their preparation. Her scenarios emphasized the importance of mental flexibility during situations where conventional responses proved inadequate and where survival required innovative thinking under extreme pressure. The facility's afternoon training schedule incorporated team exercises that required coordination between students whose individual specialties needed to be integrated into collective capabilities that exceeded the sum of individual competencies. These scenarios tested leadership abilities and communication skills that were essential for mission success in environments where coordination failures could result in casualties and mission failure. Harrison's leadership during complex exercises demonstrated tactical thinking that impressed instructors whose standards had been established through successful completion of missions that remained classified at the highest levels. His ability to coordinate diverse capabilities while adapting to changing conditions reflected experience that separated competent leaders from those whose abilities approached legendary status within special operations communities. The team dynamics that emerged during intensive training revealed personality characteristics and leadership styles that would influence future assignment decisions and operational effectiveness. Students learned to recognize individual strengths and limitations that affected team performance, developing relationships that would serve them during actual missions where personal compatibility was subordinated to professional competence, but where trust remained essential for survival. Rodriguez's physical conditioning and technical proficiency established him as a valuable team member whose reliability under stress had been proven during previous combat operations. His willingness to accept additional responsibilities during complex scenarios demonstrated leadership potential that instructors noted for future development and assignment consideration. Thompson's underwater expertise made him indispensable during scenarios requiring maritime infiltration or demolition, his technical knowledge and combat experience providing capabilities that other team members relied upon during complex operations. His familiarity with specialized equipment enabled team success in situations where conventional approaches would have resulted in mission failure. Park's medical skills provided insurance against casualties that could compromise mission effectiveness. Her ability to provide advanced trauma care while maintaining tactical awareness transforming team capabilities during personnel recovery operations. Her presence influenced tactical planning by expanding options available to team leaders during high-risk scenarios. The support staff that maintained Fort Sterling's operations worked with professional efficiency that enabled advanced training programs to operate without logistical complications that would have compromised instruction effectiveness. Their expertise in maintenance, communications, and security provided foundation capabilities that students took for granted, but which required specialized knowledge and dedicated effort to maintain. Becca's security duties provided opportunities to observe training exercises from positions that offered unique perspectives on tactical decisions and team dynamics. Her access to communication systems enabling her to monitor coordination between elements during complex scenarios. Her apparent invisibility meant that her observations went unnoticed by participants whose attention focused on immediate tactical concerns rather than broader operational considerations. The evening critique sessions that concluded each training day provided opportunities for students to analyze their performance and incorporate lessons learned into future exercises. Wilson's leadership during these discussions emphasized continuous improvement rather than competitive comparison, encouraging focus on team effectiveness rather than individual achievement in recognition that special operations missions required coordinated effort. The tactical analysis that emerged from these sessions revealed insights that enhanced student understanding of complex operations requiring coordination between multiple specialties. Their discussions incorporating perspectives that reflected diverse backgrounds and experience levels. The collaborative learning environment that Wilson fostered enabled knowledge transfer that benefited all participants while maintaining the competitive edge that drove individual excellence. Bennett's contributions to evening discussions helped students understand strategic implications of their tactical decisions, connecting immediate battlefield considerations with broader operational objectives that considered political and diplomatic consequences alongside military effectiveness. Her instruction emphasized the importance of understanding mission context beyond immediate tactical success. Reed's technical briefings provided theoretical knowledge that supported practical training. His explanations of underwater physics and demolition principles, enhancing student understanding of techniques they had practiced during exercises. His instruction enabled students to adapt their skills to novel situations they might encounter during actual operations where predetermined procedures proved inadequate. Hayes's psychological debriefings helped students process stress and decision-making challenges they had faced during close-quarters combat scenarios, her guidance enabling development of mental resilience that would serve them during actual combat situations where psychological pressure could compromise tactical effectiveness. Her instruction emphasized mental preparation alongside physical conditioning. The desert environment that surrounded Fort Sterling created training conditions that tested human endurance and equipment performance in ways that prepared students for operations in extreme climates around the world. The temperature variations, sand infiltration, and visibility conditions that characterized the Nevada desert provided natural challenges that enhanced training realism while teaching lessons about adaptation that could not be replicated in controlled environments. The facility's isolation provided security advantages that included early warning of approaching threats and terrain features that channeled potential enemy approaches into predetermined defensive zones. But that same isolation also meant that external support would be delayed during emergency situations, requiring facility personnel to rely on internal capabilities until reinforcements could arrive from distant installations. The electronic surveillance systems that monitored Fort Sterling's perimeter represented advanced technology that should have detected unauthorized approaches to the facility's security boundary. These sensors incorporated infrared detection, seismic monitoring, and radar coverage that created overlapping fields of observation designed to identify threats before they could penetrate defensive perimeters. The communication networks that connected Fort Sterling with external command structures utilized encrypted channels that protected operational information from electronic surveillance by sophisticated adversaries. These systems enabled coordination with supporting elements while maintaining operational security that protected training activities and personnel information from hostile intelligence services. The weapons storage facilities that secured Fort Sterling's extensive armory incorporated multiple layers of physical and electronic security designed to prevent unauthorized access to military equipment whose theft would compromise American security interests. The inventory control systems tracked individual weapons and ammunition quantities with precision that enabled immediate identification of missing items. The medical facilities that provided emergency care for training injuries incorporated trauma capabilities that exceeded those found in most civilian hospitals, their equipment and pharmaceutical supplies enabling treatment of wounds that would be expected during actual combat operations. The medical staff included specialists whose experience treating combat injuries provided expertise that enhanced training realism while ensuring student safety. The maintenance shops that kept Fort Sterling's complex systems operational employed technicians whose expertise enabled repair and modification of equipment whose proper functioning was essential for training effectiveness. Their capabilities included electronics repair, weapons maintenance, and vehicle service that maintained operational readiness despite the demanding conditions imposed by intensive training schedules. The evening hours at Fort Sterling carried particular significance for personnel whose duties required vigilance during periods when reduced activity might tempt potential adversaries to attempt infiltration or surveillance operations. The desert darkness provided concealment opportunities that sophisticated enemies could exploit, requiring security measures that remained effective despite reduced visibility and challenging environmental conditions. The stars that emerged as darkness settled over the facility provided the only natural illumination for activities that required concealment from electronic surveillance. Their ancient light witnessing preparations that would determine whether Fort Sterling's reputation for excellence was supported by actual capabilities rather than institutional assumptions. The night held secrets that would be revealed when circumstances demanded performance rather than theory. The incident that would shatter the carefully constructed hierarchy at Fort Sterling began with Harrison's growing frustration over what he perceived as incompetence among the support staff. His morning had started poorly when equipment he had requested for underwater demolition training arrived improperly configured, forcing him to spend valuable preparation time making adjustments that should have been completed by technicians who supposedly understood their responsibilities. The delay had cost his team precious training minutes and created scheduling conflicts that affected other groups waiting to use the specialized facilities. Becca had been assigned to assist with the equipment transport from the armory to the underwater training facility, her security clearance sufficient for handling the sensitive demolition materials that were required for Reed's advanced scenarios. The morning desert heat was already building despite the early hour, creating conditions that would make the physical labor of moving heavy equipment cases increasingly uncomfortable as the day progressed. Her efficiency in organizing the transport reflected systematic thinking that went beyond routine manual labor, but her contributions went unnoticed by students whose attention focused on their own preparation rather than logistical support. The underwater demolition exercise that Harrison's team was preparing for represented one of the most technically challenging scenarios in the Advanced Tactical Operations course curriculum. The training required precise placement of explosive charges in simulated harbor conditions while wearing full diving equipment that restricted movement and limited visibility to distances measured in feet rather than yards. Success depended not only on technical proficiency with explosive materials, but also on underwater navigation skills that enabled operators to reach their targets despite current conditions and defensive measures designed to prevent exactly the kind of infiltration they were attempting. Reed's instruction emphasized that real-world underwater demolition operations took place in environments where enemy forces actively sought to detect and eliminate infiltrating swimmers before they could accomplish their missions. The defensive measures that sophisticated adversaries employed included underwater sensors, patrol boats with sonar equipment, and trained divers whose mission was to engage American operators in underwater combat where superior numbers and familiarity with local conditions provided significant advantages to defending forces. The explosive materials that Becca transported included sophisticated charges whose proper configuration required understanding of underwater physics and demolition mathematics that exceeded basic ordnance training. The timing devices and detonation systems incorporated electronic components that were sensitive to moisture and electromagnetic interference, requiring careful handling and precise calibration to ensure reliable function under the extreme conditions that characterized actual combat operations. Harrison's team had spent hours studying the technical specifications and placement requirements for their assigned targets, memorizing approach routes and escape procedures that would enable them to complete their mission and return to extraction points without detection by simulated enemy forces. Their preparation included contingency planning for equipment malfunctions and unexpected encounters with defensive patrols, scenarios that tested their ability to adapt predetermined plans when circumstances exceeded their expectations. The diving equipment that students wore during underwater exercises included rebreathers that eliminated the telltale bubble trails that could reveal swimmer positions to surface observers. These sophisticated breathing systems required specialized training and careful maintenance to prevent malfunctions that could prove fatal in actual combat situations. Their complexity demanding technical knowledge that went far beyond basic scuba diving certification. The morning equipment inspection that preceded the underwater exercise revealed several technical problems that required immediate attention before training could commence safely. Harrison's frustration mounted as he discovered that timing devices had not been properly calibrated, and that some explosive charges showed signs of moisture infiltration that could affect their reliability during the exercise. The delays that resulted from addressing these issues threatened to disrupt the entire day's training schedule and potentially force cancellation of scenarios that other teams were depending upon for their own skill development. Becca observed the technical difficulties from her position near the equipment staging area, her security duties requiring her presence during the transport and setup of demolition materials. Her familiarity with the equipment became apparent as she noticed additional problems that the students had overlooked, her eyes detecting signs of component degradation and calibration errors that could affect exercise outcomes or potentially create safety hazards during underwater operations. The confrontation erupted without warning as Harrison's patience finally collapsed under the pressure of accumulated frustrations and competitive stress that had been building throughout the intensive training program. His voice carried across the equipment staging area with the harsh authority of someone whose leadership had been tested under actual combat conditions, his words designed to establish dominance and eliminate any question about responsibility for the equipment failures that threatened to derail his team's training progress. The verbal assault that Harrison launched was calculated to humiliate and demoralize, his choice of words reflecting casual cruelty that had become normalized within military communities, where toughness was often confused with insensitivity, and where strength was demonstrated through the systematic degradation of those perceived as weaker or less capable. His attack incorporated assumptions about gender, competence, and military hierarchy that revealed cultural prejudices that went unexamined, despite their obvious contradiction with stated military values regarding respect and professionalism. Rodriguez and Thompson joined Harrison's verbal assault with the reflexive loyalty that characterized close-knit military units, their participation driven by social dynamics that prioritized group cohesion over individual conscience. Their laughter at Becca's expense reflected the mob mentality that could emerge when competitive pressure and masculine posturing combined to create environments where cruelty was mistaken for humor, and where witnessing humiliation became a form of entertainment. The public nature of Harrison's attack maximized its humiliating impact while ensuring that Becca's perceived incompetence would become common knowledge among students whose respect was essential for effective functioning within the facility's social hierarchy. His accusations incorporated technical terminology and military jargon that demonstrated his own expertise, while highlighting what he characterized as Becca's fundamental unfitness for responsibilities that required competence beyond basic manual labor. The specific insults that Harrison employed reflected assumptions about support personnel that were common throughout military communities, where combat experience created artificial divisions between operators and those whose contributions were perceived as less valuable despite their essential role in enabling mission success. His characterization of Becca as incompetent support staff whose presence endangered operational effectiveness revealed prejudices that were rarely challenged because they reinforced existing power structures and social hierarchies. Becca's response to the systematic humiliation demonstrated self-control that impressed even those who participated in Harrison's attack. Her professional demeanor maintained, despite provocation that would have justified angry responses from anyone with normal human emotions. Her measured words acknowledged Harrison's authority, while preserving her own dignity in ways that suggested either exceptional discipline or confidence based on knowledge that others lacked. The restraint that Becca demonstrated during the confrontation reflected training that went far beyond civilian stress management or basic military discipline. Her ability to maintain composure under deliberate psychological attack, suggesting experience with interrogation resistance and survival techniques that were taught only to personnel whose capture would compromise national security interests. Her controlled breathing and neutral facial expression revealed practices that enabled continued function under extreme psychological pressure. The equipment problems that had triggered Harrison's outburst remained unresolved. Despite his verbal assault on support personnel, the technical difficulties requiring expertise that shouting could not provide, and competence that assumption could not replace. The delays that resulted from his focus on assigning blame rather than solving problems continued to threaten the day's training schedule, while creating additional stress for other teams whose exercises depended on timely completion of the underwater demolition scenarios. Reed's arrival at the equipment staging area brought instructor authority that should have de-escalated the confrontation, But his focus on technical problems rather than interpersonal dynamics meant that Harrison's behavior went unchallenged, despite its obvious violation of professional standards and basic human decency. The instructor's priorities reflected institutional culture that valued mission accomplishment over individual dignity when the two appeared to conflict. The solution to the equipment problems came from an unexpected source, as Becca quietly approached the technical difficulties with knowledge that exceeded everyone's expectations. Her hands moved over complex electronic components with familiarity that suggested training far beyond basic security clearance requirements. Her diagnostic techniques revealing understanding of specialized equipment that few personnel outside advanced technical communities possessed. The corrections that Becca made to timing devices and detonation systems demonstrated expertise that could only have been acquired through extensive hands-on experience with underwater demolition equipment. Her adjustments to calibration settings and moisture protection protocols reflected knowledge of operational requirements and environmental challenges that characterized actual combat operations rather than training exercises. The precision with which she handled explosive materials revealed training in ordnance disposal and demolition techniques that exceeded the qualifications of most special operations personnel. Her movements around sensitive components demonstrating confidence that came from familiarity earned through repeated exposure to situations where mistakes could prove fatal. Her technical knowledge encompassed both theoretical understanding and practical experience that enabled her to diagnose and correct problems that had stumped students whose training was more recent but less comprehensive. Harrison's shock at witnessing competence from someone he had dismissed as incompetent created cognitive dissonance that challenged his assumptions about military hierarchy and personal superiority. His worldview had been constructed around beliefs about merit and recognition that equated visible achievement with actual capability. His prejudices reinforced by institutional systems that often overlooked excellence that existed outside traditional advancement patterns. The underwater demolition exercise that followed Becca's technical intervention proceeded flawlessly, the equipment functioning with reliability that enabled students to focus on tactical challenges rather than mechanical problems. Harrison's team completed their assigned objectives with precision that reflected their training and preparation, but their success was made possible by technical expertise that they had failed to recognize and nearly prevented through their own prejudicial assumptions. The days that followed established a pattern of underlying tension that affected every interaction between Harrison's group and facility support staff. The successful completion of the underwater exercise had temporarily resolved the immediate training crisis, but the interpersonal damage created by the morning's confrontation continued to poison the atmosphere within the facility. Harrison's reputation as a demanding leader who accepted nothing less than perfection became coupled with a growing perception that his standards applied selectively based on his personal prejudices rather than objective assessment of competence. Becca continued her security duties with the same professional efficiency that had characterized her service since arriving at Fort Sterling, but observant personnel began to notice subtle changes in her behavior that suggested the morning's humiliation had affected her more deeply than her controlled response had indicated. Her movements around the facility carried a new quality of alertness that went beyond routine security awareness, her attention to personnel and equipment patterns revealing analytical thinking that exceeded normal vigilance requirements. The intelligence reports that reached Colonel Chen's desk during this period painted increasingly concerning pictures of threats that exceeded routine security considerations. The classified information indicated that sophisticated adversaries had developed detailed knowledge of Fort Sterling's operations and training schedules, their surveillance capabilities suggesting preparation for operations that would challenge existing defensive measures in ways that conventional security protocols were not designed to address. Chen's arrival at Fort Sterling carried significance that became apparent through her immediate focus on security vulnerabilities that had been identified through intelligence channels operating beyond the awareness of facility personnel. Her reputation for solving complex problems through innovative approaches had earned respect from military leaders whose own careers had been built on successful completion of missions that pushed the boundaries of conventional military doctrine. The recognition between Chen and Becca was subtle, conveyed through professional interactions that appeared routine to casual observers, but revealed communication patterns that suggested shared experiences under circumstances that could not be acknowledged openly without compromising operational security. Their exchanges carried undertones that trained personnel might have noticed, but the intensity of ongoing training activities meant that such observations were relegated to peripheral awareness rather than focused attention. The security briefing that Chen conducted for facility leadership painted pictures of threats that required immediate response from personnel whose skills exceeded conventional military capabilities. Her intelligence sources operated at levels that required congressional oversight, her information revealing enemy capabilities that challenged conventional understanding of asymmetric warfare and unconventional tactics that had been developed specifically to exploit American vulnerabilities. The terrorist cell that intelligence agencies had identified possessed training and equipment that rivaled American special operations capabilities, their planning suggesting objectives that included acquiring classified training materials and eliminating personnel whose knowledge posed threats to future operations. Their infiltration techniques incorporated lessons learned from studying American security procedures, their preparation reflecting sophisticated understanding of defensive measures and response protocols. The attack that materialized during the pre-dawn hours exceeded even Chen's dire predictions, coming with coordinated precision that suggested extensive surveillance and detailed knowledge of facility operations. The initial assault targeted communication systems and key personnel whose elimination would cripple defensive coordination. The enemy's tactical approach demonstrating professional military training that rivaled American capabilities in ways that challenged fundamental assumptions about asymmetric warfare. The casualties discovered at strategic locations throughout the facility had been positioned to send messages about the attacker's capabilities while creating psychological pressure that would affect defender responses. The precision with which enemy forces had eliminated specific targets revealed intelligence preparation that included detailed knowledge of individual schedules and security protocols that should have been impossible for external adversaries to obtain. The facility's lockdown procedures activated with military efficiency, but conventional security measures proved inadequate against enemies who possessed equipment and training that enabled them to exploit vulnerabilities in defensive preparations that had been designed to counter conventional threats rather than sophisticated special operations attacks. The crisis that faced Fort Sterling required specialized response from personnel whose skills transcended normal operational parameters. Harrison's volunteers stepped forward with confidence that reflected their training and combat experience, but the underwater approach that would be required to reach enemy positions demanded expertise that went beyond conventional special operations capabilities. The mission would test every aspect of their preparation while requiring improvisation that could not be anticipated through training scenarios that had been designed to challenge individual skills rather than test responses to coordinated attacks by professional adversaries. The moment of truth arrived when Chen approached Becca with a request that shattered every assumption the students had made about competence and capability. Her words carried authority that transcended facility hierarchies, her knowledge of Becca's true identity transforming the security guard into someone whose legend had been whispered in the darkest corners of special operations communities, where classified achievements were measured by their strategic impact rather than public recognition. The sealed Trident tattoo that became visible as Becca removed her outer uniform shirt told stories that no amount of false documentation could obscure. The insignia marked her as one of the few women who had earned the right to wear the symbol through trials that broke stronger individuals, her training tested in combat zones where failure resulted in international incidents and congressional investigations that would never see public acknowledgement. The revelation that followed transformed every assumption about merit and achievement that had characterized relationships within the facility, challenging hierarchies based on perception rather than actual competence. The students who had dismissed Becca as incompetent support staff were forced to confront the reality that excellence often existed in unexpected places, and that true capability was often hidden behind circumstances that obscured rather than revealed exceptional achievement. Harrison's reaction to witnessing excellence that exceeded his own considerable capabilities forced him to confront the psychological impact of having his worldview systematically destroyed by someone he had dismissed as irrelevant. His assumptions about competence and hierarchy lay in ruins around him, replaced by humbling recognition that true expertise often existed in unexpected places, and that respect should be earned rather than assumed based on visible credentials or institutional position. The apology that Harrison offered carried the weight of someone whose arrogance had been shattered by inconvenient truth, his words acknowledging not just his error in judgment but his failure to recognize excellence that had been hidden in plain sight. The other students experienced similar revelations as they were forced to question everything they thought they understood about merit and achievement in ways that would influence their future leadership development. The demonstration that followed revealed capabilities that exceeded every expectation the students had developed during their training at Fort Sterling. Becca's preparation was methodical, her movements economical and purposeful, as she donned equipment that seemed familiar in ways that suggested intimate knowledge rather than recent instruction. Her transformation from invisible support staff to operational legend was complete and terrifying in its implications for everyone who had underestimated her capabilities. The underwater infiltration that neutralized the terrorist threat demonstrated expertise that could only have been developed through years of actual combat experience against enemies whose capabilities rivaled American Special Operations Forces. Her route through defended waters avoided detection systems that had been specifically designed to prevent exactly the kind of approach she executed with apparent ease, her navigation skills reflecting training that transcended conventional instruction. Chen's announcement of Becca's appointment as Chief Instructor for Maritime Special Operations carried authority that shaped policy at levels influencing global security considerations. The promotion represented institutional recognition that some talents were too valuable to waste on bureaucratic convenience, her elevation to senior staff ensuring that her expertise would benefit future generations of special operations personnel who would face threats that exceeded current planning assumptions. The transformation that followed extended beyond individual skill development to encompass fundamental changes in facility culture that reflected Becca's influence on every aspect of operations. Students learned that excellence in combat required excellence in character, that successful missions depended on teams whose members respected each other's contributions, regardless of apparent rank or recognition, and that true leadership began with recognition of human dignity and potential rather than assumptions based on limited observation. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.